What up, is Marcus Dynasty with that? We're going to be talking about what you can do on draft time when you're on the clock or when you're coming up to being on the clock. What you can do to help give yourself an advantage versus other owners. If you're new to the channel, again, we're giving away a DeAndre Swift signed jersey when we hit 2K. We've been slowly chugging along here. And so yesterday we did what we can do before the draft. How can we prepare ourselves properly for a dynasty redraft, a dynasty startup? I don't even know why I keep saying dynasty redraft. Just a fantasy football redraft and a dynasty rookie draft. And so the first thing, it's almost the most important thing, because drafts never, and I mean never, go the way that you plan it to. And so mock drafts, or just you can say, hey, these are the concrete, this is going to be player 1, 2, and 3, like no matter what, in every league. And then all of a sudden your league comes up and it goes 1, 2, and then the third player starts falling and you're like, what is going on? Or somebody takes a quarterback. Auntie Susan from the kitchen decides to do something and distracts a player, and the player runs out of time, or what's up, and all of a sudden gets auto-picked. It's like things crazily happen, and I've seen pretty much everything. So when that comes to, be flexible. And that means have your draft strategies being flexible. If you are coming in like, I am 0 RB strategy, or if you come in, I am drafting a tight end early. Well, guess what? Let's say you're 203, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm drafting a tight end at 203. Kelsey's there, Andrews is always there, and Pitts is always there. And you know what? Guess what? 112 and 201, this one weird owner decides to draft 2 tight ends, and then 202 panics and goes, well, I need the third best tight end. I need Pitts. So you got one owner's got Kelsey and Andrews, and the next one's got Pitts, and all of a sudden you're like, well, now what do I do? So it's always being flexible with these things, and I think that helps with mock drafting and seeing different strategies and going, okay, well, this is kind of my strategy A, but if strategy A doesn't work out, then strategy B will look better than on paper versus what I have in mock drafting, because there's going to be players that fall. So things like that. The next is going to be avoid the average draft position or the next person up rankings. It is very easy to look and go, hey, I'm drafting 24th, and that 20th player is staring you at the eyes, and you don't necessarily like him. You maybe even think he's a bust, but he's 20th, and you want a player that's 29th. It's like, no. Go with your player that you think is going to be a better player. And this is also very determining if where you are in the draft. If you are on a turn, middle, or on the beginning of the other turn, so really it's your kind of turn, middle, or turn. I think the turns are the hardest because you have to reach so far in advance for some players if you believe they are the best player ranking available left. And sometimes you're reaching 5, 10, 15 rankings back. And you might see it's funny when you get people that have the paper out. It used to happen when they're like, oh my goodness, you just drafted running back 12? I got to go to the next page. So I always say, avoid the ADP stuff, avoid the next ranking, like, oh, this is who you should draft if you were mock drafted, or not mock drafted, if you were auto picked. It's like, avoid those things. I think those things can detour. They can distract you from your actual game plan and getting you players that you really want. So don't be afraid to reach is one of the biggest advices, because sometimes I look at a player and I go, man, I really like the player that's ranked 5 rankings behind this other player, but you know what? That player's ranked 5 other spots, and maybe the other people are smarter than me. Too bad. You know what? This is fantasy football or dynasty fantasy football. Have fun. Pick your players that you want. The next is, of course, this kind of adds to it, but where you are does matter, because where you are, if you're in the middle, it can definitely change your strategy, because you don't have to necessarily reach. So there's going to be a little bit more flexibility with who you can pick and what you can do. That's why I don't like necessarily being on turns very much. If I'm in that 10, 11 spot, there is an advantage being closer to the turn, though, and that is seeing what the other team has drafted. So when we start getting into these super flex, tight end premiums, when you start seeing that, okay, I'm team 10, team 11 and 12 have both drafted 2 quarterbacks. I have 0 quarterbacks. Not a great strategy, I would say, right off the bat, probably. But I would maybe not need to draft a quarterback at that spot. I could wait until it comes back. Now, there's also times that strategy ends up burning in your face, and you end up passing on a quarterback, and one of those 2 teams goes, I will take a third-rate quarterback. This also helps for tight ends. You see tight ends, you're like, hey, team 11 and 12 don't have tight ends. I want that. I want Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts is going to be way up there in startup. Maybe it's redraft. Maybe it's the third round in redraft. Again, you're 310 and you're like, I am taking Kyle Pitts because I don't want him to get taken at 311, 312, 401, 402. And I'm worried that 403, he's not going to come back to me. Then take him, and then maybe you can take a positional player that is not as big of a decrease. And that's another thing that I look at some of these either ors. So you look at either or. You're like, okay, so if I get... let's say if I draft this running back and this wide receiver, or this wide receiver and this running back, I do kind of the AB. Like, what would I rather have? Because it's the biggest strategy, and I've heard this from multiple different channels as well, is drafting backwards. And that's what it means by drafting backwards. You draft backwards by, you almost look at the future rounds and go, or the future pick and go, okay, do I like these tier of running backs? Do I like these tier of wide receivers? Am I at the end of a tier? Am I at the beginning of a tier? Where am I starting this? This helps you if you figure out tiers. Tier-based drafting is one of the most important aspects of at the draft day, figuring out where's the drop-offs. Because if you are at the end of the drop-offs, then you're doing great. If you're at the beginning, you might be losing value on the draft, especially when it comes to Dynasty Fantasy Football, when there's much more trading within the drafts, especially Dynasty startups. There was times that I traded very aggressively to get up to an end of a tier for a wide receiver or a running back. And there was times that I was bailing out very strongly because there was 5 wide receivers I liked, all very similar. And I'm like, hey, let me just start collecting, moving up the back part of the picks, and I'll move back 5 picks, 7 picks, 8 picks. I'll move back, and then maybe I'll move two rounds up 6, 7, 8 picks. And so I'm moving up a little bit in the back end, and then I'm moving back in there. So that's what tier-based drafting is, drafting backwards. Some of the most important things that you guys need to understand, because really it is the either or. It's like I look at if I'm going into round 2, 3, it's like, okay, this is a lot of times in Superflex where I'm drafting a running back and wide receiver. Okay, well, what happens if I draft this running back, and let's say what wide receiver would go well with that, or what wide receivers could be available? Do I like that? And then which wide receiver, if I drafted that wide receiver, which running backs would feel, or what would be my choices? Is there a big tier drop off? So again, tier-based drafting is, again, one of the most important aspects to redraft Dynasty startups. And again, Dynasty rookie drafts too. You can start trading into some of these tiers too. There's times that I from a move from pick 108 to 107 seems pretty cheap, and I'm like, well, you just lost a tier, and from 108 to 112 doesn't matter much to me. I could have moved back 3-4 picks for that exact. It didn't really matter as much. So I think that's why we have a bunch of these channels. I hope this is all making sense. I hope that it's making sense in my brain, but I hope I'm communicating it properly. And if I'm not, sorry. It's hard to, I need a whiteboard and be like, this is what we're doing. And maybe I'll have to actually do another mock draft for you guys, so I can show you the thought process and what I mean by some of this tier-based and ADP stuff and all that different things and drafting backwards. But again, if you want that, then maybe I'll put it on. So I just want to keep this video nice and short, underneath 10 minutes. That is some of the best things that you can do on draft, not even on draft day, on the draft board clock time. When the draft starts, this is stuff that you can do to help set yourself above other owners. All right? This is Marcus' Dynasty Dads. Peace out. I'll see you again tomorrow.